Hi, welcome to another Tomcat video. In this video, we're talking to local artist, sculptor, wood carver, painter Tim Fowler, and motorcycle aficionado and collector about the MSI motorcycle shop in the former MSI shop in Georgetown. And we're going to learn a little history about the shop and about Phil, and then maybe talk about a little bit of motorcycle race history for the Seattle area. So super stoked to be in this video. Thanks for Tim for being in it, and hope you enjoy it.
God, these things, I'm gonna have to stand near a fire with these on. Oh, you cradle motors sometimes, you get these fucking heavy greasy shit things and I'm crawling out of the car.
All right, so the question is, what's the name of the shop?
MSI.
MSI, and what year did you first go to MSI?
I think 85.
85, and it was owned just by Phil.
His partner had stepped away from active work. I don't know what their finances were, but originally it was him and a guy named Joe Covini. And Joe ran parts and Phil did more service, but they both did it. And they, like I said, they only did the self-serve thing for a year or two before they realized they just couldn't keep up with it. And they shrank the size of the shop and just focused on service. And they worked on Brit bikes. They specialized in Brit bikes and Italian bikes, but they would work on anything. No choppers though. Choppers.
They had a hard line, yeah.
There's no chopper in the door. You could bring the engine to your chopper and have him do something and give it back to you, but you could not bring it in the door. Phil, Frank Kenyon, Dave Green, Steve Redford, Walter Barbie, Sean Bundy.
And he's in the sandblaster.
He was always bead blasting parts for his doorstop engines. But it was all about engines. We had engines everywhere. With 160 motors laying all over the place. A lot of Triumph stuff.
So how did you first discover the shop? You said you were trying to find like a cable or a part or something like that?
Yeah, I had to have a cable end repaired. I had an old Sears Allstate Puch made in Austria. And Sears, of course, wasn't selling motorcycle parts anymore. And I didn't know. I had just been into bikes for a couple of years. And, Honda, you just got a cable from the Honda dealer. But so Ross at Polk Cycle, I can't remember why I was in there, told me to go to Phil and he could make cables. He was the only shop that really could.
Is that where they're pouring the lead on the end of the ball?
I even have a solder pot I bought because now I have to do it. And it's sitting over here. Phil, of course, wouldn't get rid of anything, or I would have bought his solder pot and all his cable stuff. But that is a solder pot.
Oh, that's
Plug
awesome.
it in, it gets hot.
Oh, yeah.
The solder turns molten, you dip your thing in there.
So you can
splay the ends. Cable making's kind of an art, and if it breaks, you could be in deep trouble. So, but occasionally on these bikes, I have to make and modify cables, and I always relied on Phil to do that. If I needed a cable, I'd bring the whole bike down, and he'd either fix the one I had or just make a whole new one. He had everything. The only thing he didn't do in there was grind crankshafts. I mean, he had a boring bar. He could bore from 50cc to whatever you had. And he had valve grinding stuff. And he had oxyacetylene welder, a good bead blaster. Don Marr fixed it when it got all wore out. He had a lathe, so he could make bushings and simple stuff. He could hone valve guides. He would replace valve guides. Yeah, there was his main toolbox. And this toolbox. And he had at least some of the manuals. I had to sort of edit the original, because otherwise it would have been another foot longer, and there's only so much clutter you can carve.
And this is this jacket that you hand carved.
Yeah, he kept his riding an old bell staff on the post there. And some helmets that were usually really old.
What do you got? What are these?
Oh, just boxes. I had to sort of randomly try and carve abstract clutter.
Because the shop was just filled with crap.
Stuff everywhere.
Yeah, like in here and stuff, and
flat, yeah.
And in here, yeah.
Yeah, trying to abstract clutter without carving each individual thing. But I did barrels and ashtrays and beer bottles and just endless stuff.
Wow, that is that is freaking incredible.
To make this, he had a bunch of special tools hanging above the solvent tank. So I just gutted a cheap broken pocket watch and took the parts out of it because they look like what I wanted things to look like.
And you got lathe,
Yeah.
and this is the parts washer station.
Yep. And I carved 2 vices on benches. Carving vices was tricky, man. There's a lot of curves in a vice.
And they're tiny.
Yeah, trying to make a one-piece vice was not the easiest.
Do you just eyeball the scale?
Kind of eyeball it, and you use it. You measure them 6, kind of an inch to a foot, roughly. So a 6-foot guy is 6 inches. The fridge was covered with stickers.
Yeah.
So those are bits of veneer. I had this veneer packet.
Was it sticker veneer?
No, those are pieces of real wood veneer like you'd glue on furniture. I got them when they were there. And plus there was this wacky scene on Friday nights. It was probably every night where people drank beer and worked on their stuff. And that's kind of where, because I didn't know a whole lot, that's where I learned a lot of the basics, how to time an ignition, a points ignition, and just how to set them correctly, and just carburation, sink and slides, and and that sort of thing, and just general stuff. He had a press for pressing stuff apart.
Like an arbor press?
He had an arbor press. I mean, it leaked oil all over the place, but it worked. He had everything that you would need to do stuff, because, old bikes, man, there's a lot you had to do. You don't take the crankshaft out of your new bike and, put a new big end in it. The Phil had the stuff to do that. And then he had a connection to a machine shop in the neighborhood, so in that old Triumph that's over there, we had that all apart because it was completely shot. He sent the crankshaft there, and they reground it, sent it back, and he would check it before he installed the new bearings. And
so he could do. He was super knowledgeable, and he had local connection to businesses that could do like more fabrication
aircraft
stuff.
Welding was down the street for aluminum welding because he didn't weld aluminum. And he built his own racing sidecar chassis with Triumph engines in it. Started with a twin, realized that wasn't going to cut it against the Japanese 4-cylinders, so he put a triple in it. Because he had primarily a Brit bike guy, because he came up in the 50s, and you either rode a Harley or you rode a Brit bike. I mean, and the Harleys are big, heavy things, and he rode in the woods. You got a 500 single, and he tried all that, and he dirt tracked.
Oh yeah.
And he was a dirt tracker, and he went in the army, drafted, and sent him off to Germany and Italy and stuff, and he came back, and this had to start over dirt tracking, so he had to go back to a 250, and he's like 6'4" or something, 6'3", on this 250 Ducati, because that was the hot ticket then. It was an overhead cam and could be modified, and you had to take them apart all the time. And he said it was like 10.5 to 1 compression. And
where was he going for races near here?
There's a lot of local dirt tracks.
Okay.
Monroe, Castle Rock. I mean, I wasn't around then. This is not my era, but there was plenty. And he went national for a while. He drove all over the country with other guys, and he was the number 5 point novice in 250 back then.
Was he ever sponsored by any manufacturer?
No.
Just for the love of it.
Nobody was sponsored. That was you had to be, and even the sponsor. I mean, guys, it's like that book on Dick Mann. Those guys drive around with pickup trucks and a trailer, and that's the national champion. I mean, they didn't make any money. It's not like now. There was no real money to be made. You could eke out a living, but only just. And he was just a dirt tracker amateur guy, and he's pretty good, but he's too big, really.
Was he, when you were in the shop, was he pretty friendly about teaching you stuff?
Like, yeah.
He gave you
he was like the professor.
That's really nice that you had some, because not every shop is like that.
No shop is like that.
That's right.
Hardly, unless you're like really, and all the shops that were like had sort of a little bit of a scene going on. As far as I know, that's all gone. That is just completely gone. You got repair shops. They can't take the time because they're paying for our expensive Seattle dirt. So nobody can take time and hang out and work on your own shit. Guys try. I mean, Valentine Motorworks is the closest thing I can think of to an old school motorcycle shop. I was interested in smaller bikes and 50s and 60s.
50s and 60s. And what, like, kind of lower CC stuff, right?
Yeah, from like 90 to 500.
Okay. And
I've had bigger bikes, but they were big, heavy things, and they were more of it. And they're not very useful in the city. And the way the traffic is, really having a big twin, an old vintage bike, if you try and get out of town on the thing, Yeah, everyone's going 70 or they're going 10 miles an hour. It's just, you know.
Did you all ever go out on rides like with Phil, or was that past that era where he was just kind of hanging out at that point?
He didn't go out much. I know, you know, they used to do that bonehead enduro that Tom Samuelson did, and I know Phil did that a couple times because I loaned him an NSU Scrambler from the 50s that he had probably taken out of the box at Polk Cycle when he worked there. Because Polk sold NSUs for a while, and Phil remembered him, which is why he was. And they had an interesting overhead cam drive, and you know they were too heavy for what they were, but they were, you know. So he liked them a bit, and when I started working on them, he was more than willing to grind valves and troubleshoot them and bore cylinders for me, and. Yeah.
So who else was in the shop besides Phil? Like I know in your wood carving that you made, there's like 4 or 5 guys in there.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, you know, there's always people there at night, you know, and it varied depending on which night and what time of day. And this had gone on since the 70s. I mean, people would stop there for their pre-race prep. They would be frantically running around. They used to call the racers, Joe called them the rushing team because they're always rushing around. Steve Redford was one of those guys. You know, a lot of these guys have just passed away in the last few years. But Redford is in there. Frank, Redford's buddy Dave Green. This is just old school guys from the 80s, really. Although Frank came along in the 90s, but he was an old guy. He was one of the first of them to pass away. But Frank spent a lot of time there and built a lot of bikes. And when we cleaned out Redford's house, after the looters had wrecked a lot of it, there were some photos that Steve had taken in the shop of Frank and Phil sitting around. And actually, my old Norton, the one I got knocked off last year and ruined, was on the lift. And I got a nice photo of Phil. And those photos, looking at them and seeing the layout as I remembered it, was part of what spurred me to make that big elaborate diorama carving. I used to make that kind of thing back in the 70s and 80s.
I went to one of the show where you had like you must have had like 15 different kind of carvings out there.
I did, but
that was
I didn't
awesome.
have any diorama ones with little figures and all that.
How long did it take you to make this diorama?
Winter. I couldn't tell you. It has 6 figures in there, and they take 4 or 5 hours a piece. I mean, I'm not fast at wood carving. I've done it all my life, but I'm dog slow, and so it takes me a long time.
And you there's a lot of detail in the model. There's like you had the parts washer kind of thing and the lathe and the
place was like this. This place is worse. This place is an overcrowded mess, but it had stuff. And when you've been in a place a long time, it gets into layers. Stuff gets stuck on the wall, photos and just different memorabilia. Some of it's rubbish, some of it's really poignant and fun to look at. And other stuff is just trash. And it just piles up, just like this place. And if you see a Henry Weinhardt's box in here, that came from Phil's, because that was the beer he drank. I mean, you know, unfortunately, he did drink, you know, a lot of beer, and
yeah, so you're saying
would bring beer in there all the time.
Kind of the end of the shop, he was kind of drinking a little bit much, and it was kind of the end of the era there.
Yeah, he couldn't make it rent-wise. There were other factors.
Yeah,
you know, but he was getting older. His clientele was fading away.
That would be really that would be tough.
You know, there wasn't much work around. There were some other things that I won't go into. It was just he was retired, but he didn't know what to do. He had work he could have done, but he didn't do it because he was old and tired and whatever made him drink that much beer. And the rent was going up, and the work wasn't coming in, and he wasn't doing much, and his things were really bad in the last year or two. We kept warning him, you know, a couple times we almost had to close the shop, and then like I bought an old Goosey from him for more than it was worth and kept that for a year or two and traded it to for a bike. But anyway, something would bail him out and get him caught up again.
Get him back up.
But finally we couldn't do it, and his health was poor, he was deteriorating, everything was going to hell, and he broke his hip, which in a way was good because then the VA kept him. They got him all cleaned up. They eased him off the beer, and
was it that Beacon Hill VA?
Yeah, they saved him. And I told him once that getting drafted was the best thing that ever happened to him because it gave him health care. And he said, and he also got to see Germany and Italy and France. And when we cleaned out his house to get it ready for him, we had to do a lot more than clean it out. There are photos, nice black and white photos he had taken of European street scenes because he's this young guy from, you know, South Seattle, you know, and here he is in Germany, and he liked cameras, and he got his hands on one. And so he had to agree that the VA, and he didn't like hear people badmouth the VA because, you know,
it really helped him out.
Yeah. The people came through and saved him And then he got 13 years of living in his own house until he died.
Oh man,
So he did really well.
that's pretty good.
I mean, other than the thieves breaking in, but
Yeah.
something would have happened, you know.
Yeah,
And
but
he-
people came together and helped him out.
Yeah, we
at the
did
end.
a big effort. We did a big auction. One guy bought a whole bunch of Phil's old equipment for more than it was worth, and had big young guys to haul it away. You know, boring bars. I think he kept the lathe, but it was quite a scene. You know, and we still had to go over there and fix stuff at the house.
So how long was that shot there for?
From 73 to 09.
7309.
You're sitting next to the last bike to leave there. It's even written on the gas tank. The magic marker on the top of the tank. Should say last bike at MSI unless it's more.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got two something 09.
Yeah, so that was we had a big auction and party and whatnot and closed it. But, you know, you start a business in your 20s, early 30s, and a family, and these guys, you know, repair guys or whatever, and, you know, either own the building or they get a good lease and eventually buy it, and they often stay 30 years. But that may be a thing of the past, because independent repair shops for anything is very difficult to do.
Yeah, it feels different now. Like just imagining a place even staying the same in the city for 30 years. In these times, it doesn't feel like that.
No.
That's an option right now.
The tech is sort of turbocharged the economy in Seattle, and it's just killed a lot of it. It's like, that money, it's kind of like fertilizer. You spread a little money around, things go good. You put too much fertilizer on it, it all turns orange and dies. And that's how I think of Seattle now, is it's turning orange and dying, you know? It's this miserable new, everything is just bulldoze it and go, and it's ugly. I mean, I'm still gonna live here, but
yeah, this is a great, awesome place to live, and there's so much good stuff still here.
I hate to see it just get blown away.
Yeah.
So maybe this tech slowdown that's happening right now, it's a good thing. Although I'm not the guy getting laid off.
Yeah.
I'm grandfathered in, but if I was a young guy, I would take one look at Seattle with the skills I had in the 70s, which weren't much. I knew how to show up for work, but I didn't know how to do much. I would just keep going. This isn't a place for that. It's too expensive.
Yeah.
You can't have you can't live in a funky rooming house with a garage in the back and work on your own shit. You can't do that. There isn't around. I bought a big pile of 160 engines, mostly boat anchors, and when a lot of local guys were racing them, we just put them in the middle of the shop floor, a big box of carburetors, engines, everything. And anybody who needed anything, if they could just go down there and get it. They didn't have to find me. Phil was always around except Sunday, and they could pay me whatever they wanted to pay me for it later if it was any good. And that way we kind of kept parts in circulation. Whole engine's just laying there. You wanted a head, just yard it off.
Just pulled it off there. Yeah.
Sometimes I'd pull the heads and start working, freeing up the motors. Bundy made a little tool, like a jig, that would push the pistons down. You would put this plate with holes drilled over the studs. You had to push the pistons down evenly with a frozen engine, heat it up and soak it, and slowly, because if you start beating on it, the piston grows. Now it doesn't want to come out. So when it does come out, it breaks the sleeve at the bottom, so you back to zero. So we had to do a lot of engine freeing. We found classic Coke worked pretty well. The new Coke did not.
Like to free up the
free them up, yeah.
Yeah.
And I used ATF mixed with lacquer thinner. I've used WD-40. You can use anything. Croil. There's a million. Everybody swears by one thing or another. But I freed up a lot of motors. Jeez.
And you had a machine shop that could machine.
Phil would do it. He'd right there, bore cylinders, grind the valves. I used to have him build up stacks of cylinders and heads all ready to go. So if somebody blew an engine, we could bring it here, put a new top end on it, have it on the track the next day.
That's awesome.
If somebody blew it up on Saturday, we'd fix it overnight.
So having that shop was pretty crucial to that racing class.
Gave him money. Oh, it's absolutely. I couldn't have done it without him. And by running all those, and he didn't charge very much per hole when he was boring, and he was not up to date on pricing. And so I would to keep him in money too, because the place was always, in those years was always running out of money. I would have like 5 years worth of cylinders already ready to go. I still have some. I think I sold some to Joe for what I remembered paying Phil to bore him when he did his 160. Because now we race 175s, 160s are obsolete. Going to read this?
Yeah, read it.
MSI, Motorcycle Service Incorporated, was opened on April Fool's Day 1973 by two guys who'd worked at other bike shops and wanted their own. Capitalizing on the motorcycle boom of the early 70s and the interest in doing things yourself, they rented stalls and tools, gave advice, and sold parts. That was fun, but the 12-hour days became too much, so the shop became an all-brand repair shop with an emphasis on British bikes. Everything from tune-ups to complete engine overhauls, cylinder boring and headwork, cable making, wheel lacing, electrical, welding, etc. The only thing that couldn't come in the door were choppers, as the proprietors loathed them. After 5 p.m. though, and on Saturdays, the shop reverted to its self-serve with supervision roots. It was an unequal parts repair shop, vocational school, tavern, coffee shop, race headquarters, parts depot, and social hub depending on your agenda. Open 6 days and nights a week for 36 years. Tinkerers, newbies, veteran riders, frantic racers doing last-minute prep, people in a vintage bikes no sane person would work on, etc., poured through the door, and it went on often until the wee hours. There were long-time riders who needed the machining work and special equipment next to people who were removing a spark plug for the first time. It's where I learned most of what little I know and enabled me to enjoy riding and racing the old bikes since I started going there in the 1980s. The 6 people in the carving are real, although half are gone now. The proprietor is holding a crankcase wearing his shop coat. I tried to show it as I remember it as best I could and still get it done in 5 months last winter.